Yeah, hydration would certainly be important. Again, I don't pretend. In many cases, medical professionals who've been studying these diseases for decades have no idea what causes them. I certainly am not going to pretend I understand what causes every condition. I can tell you that a hydrated, clean, well-functioning body is much less likely to become diseased, regardless of whatever the cause is. These we're not unlucky. There's always a reason that these things happen. And partly there may be a genetic predisposition. That may be part of what's going on. But that's rarely all that's going on. I haven't worked with all that many people with arthritis, but I've worked with one I know fairly well, and I can tell you her story. I thought I might have shared some of this before, but stop me if this sounds familiar. I had a 70-year-old woman fast with me 10 years ago. In August, it'll be 10 years. At the time, she had arthritis that had crippled, gnarled most of her joints. So, I mean, she could still use her hands, but her fingers looked kind of strange, kind of ugly, and she was in constant pain. And she was heavily medicated for this. I mean, she took a couple different painkillers every day for something like 45 years at that point. At least 40 years, since she was 30 or 35 years old, maybe. 35 years, something like that. Quite a long time. She did a relatively short fast. She fasted for 16 days, which is much shorter than I would normally recommend for someone who's dealing with this kind of damage. And yet, even in that short a time frame, roughly half of the disfigurement disappeared. And she had no pain whatsoever for the first time in 35 years without medication. Now, there's always new research that's going on now. Finally, people are starting to look at fasting, not so much really the long-term therapeutic fasts with humans. There have been animal studies, but there's someone asked me a question today, and it was something I'd never heard of. I went and looked it up, and sure enough, there is a protein that lives in every cell, dormant, but is activated when there's a certain amount of inflammation that is there to try to help heal the body. And this woman had contacted me, and she's working with some company as an independent distributor that markets this. You can take this stuff as a supplement. Okay? I'm not interested in that. I'd encourage you to also not be interested in that. Why not? We've talked about this before a couple times. Why might taking this naturally occurring protein as a supplement be harmful to you? Yeah, because what happens is the law of efficiency tells us that the body is always looking to be as efficient as possible, and if we're consuming something that our body produces, it will begin to produce less of it. It will cease to do its own job because it's more efficient for it not to. If you can get it from outside, why should my body go to the trouble of making this stuff if it doesn't have to? Okay. What's interesting was, so she's telling me about the product, etc., and I said, that's very interesting. I hope you do well with it. I said, if you're interested in really taking your health to the highest level possible, you might want to take a look at some of my videos on fasting. And she said, yeah. She said, I've heard fasting also activates this protein. And I went and checked it out, and sure enough, there are several studies that show that fasting activates this protein in a way that doesn't happen otherwise, which means what? It's reversing all kinds of damage and inflammation. Fasting allows the body to do this in a way that doesn't happen any other time of our lives. Now, some of you aren't surprised to hear this because you've already experienced it. But a lot of people probably would be surprised to hear it. So, maybe this was what was going on. Maybe it was the fact that by getting all this old garbage out of her body, she was able to get much better hydrated. And she got a lot of old garbage out of her body, the way people do. Okay? unfortunately, in this case, she did not continue making excellent choices. In fact, she reported to me after she got home that she discontinued the diet I'd recommended, because she was eliminating 10 times a day and it was inconvenient. I said to her, "Are you kidding? You'd rather carry this old stuff around in your body?" I'm embarrassed to tell you that this woman is my mother. Okay, she just turned 80. This was 10 years ago. She's back on painkillers and has recreated some of the damage, but she eliminated, I've seen this other times. Her case was the most severe I'd seen, and incredibly rapid transformation, 16 days fasting. Fasting works virtually every single time, almost regardless of the condition. Almost regardless, because again, remember, what we're doing is giving the body the optimal conditions to cleanse and heal itself. That does not mean that every condition is going to heal completely. There are conditions that may never heal completely because there's been too much damage. In her case, it may well be true that her hands are never going to look like they did when she was 18. It's probably the case. But there's virtually always going to be some improvement. And if healing is possible, it's the most effective way. And again, what's interesting is there are increasing studies showing this. A few years ago, studies were showing human growth hormone being pumped into the body at high rates while fasting, which literally makes us grow younger. Now we see these studies showing, the body's producing this. And these studies, I didn't even notice the dates. They may have been there for a while. I just hadn't seen them before. Okay, but there's increasing evidence for what I've witnessed for the last 20 years, and other people have been aware of for much longer than that